Mr. Emil McGarrell, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Water, and Chairperson for today's proceedings. Mr. Sheikh Bass, Chief Executive Officer of the GWI. Mr. Nigel Niles, also of the GWI. Dr. Paulette Bino, our consultant and our facilitator for the next 2 days. Representatives of government agencies, regional authorities, non-government organizations, and international agencies, stakeholders, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Global Water Partnership Caribbean, I want to say that I'm very pleased to be here in Guyana today and to be able to stand before you and bring remarks on behalf of my organization. For those of you who may not be acquainted with the work of the GWP-C, and I suspect that most of you would not be acquainted with our work, let me just give you a bit on who we are and what we do within the Caribbean region. We are one of 13 regional water partnerships of the Global Water Partnership Organization, which is based in Stockholm, Sweden. And we are a network of over 2,500 partners across the globe. Global Water Partnership Caribbean was established in 2004 to support Caribbean countries in the sustainable management of their water resources by fostering an integrated water resources management, or IWRM, fostering an IWRM approach at the community, national, and regional level. Our mission is to assist Caribbean countries in achieving long-term water security through integrated water resources management. IWRM is a cross-sectoral approach. It is a process designed to replace the traditional fragmented approach to water resources management, which has led us to poor services and has placed water resources at risk. IWRM is a holistic approach to managing water, which takes into consideration the different uses of water and that these uses are interdependent. The IWRM process therefore means that water allocations and management decisions about water consider the effects of each use on the other and is grounded in the understanding that water resources are at the same time a social and economic good, as well as being a natural resource and an integral component of our natural ecosystem. Critical to the implementation of IWRM is partnerships and the need for the inclusion of stakeholders from all levels and sectors. GWP-C is committed with working with its partners to promote and strengthen interaction and cooperation to sustain IWRM in the Caribbean region. Our partners include government ministries, water resource agencies and utilities, private sector companies, non-government organizations, community-based organizations, and other entities. GWP-C has more than 70 partners in 20 countries in the Caribbean. In Guyana, we currently have 4 partners: the Guyana Water Incorporated, GWI, the University of Guyana, the Rural Women's Network, and the Guyana Citizens Initiative, the GCI. We welcome more organizations in Guyana to join our network and to partner with us. IWRM policy and planning is a key component for better water resource management. However, this has not been fully adopted in the Caribbean region. There are some countries which have already developed their IWRM policy and plans, including Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and a couple of others. And now Guyana is joining this list. Guyana is known as the land of many waters, and we at the GWP-C are committed to ensuring that Guyana can lay claim to this statement for centuries to come. In recognition of the need for enabling policies and frameworks for managing Guyana's many waters across various sectors, users, and uses, the Ministry of Housing and Water agreed to collaborate with the GWP-C to develop this policy and roadmap for Guyana, and which will form the basis of your discussions here over the next 2 days. GWP-C has been working with the ministry for well over a year on this initiative, and what you see here today is just one step in the process. The commencement of this activity took place through a competitive bidding process, which was open to organizations and persons throughout the Caribbean region. On examination of the candidates, a Guyanese national was rated above all others and selected to work with us. Dr. Paula Bino of the University of Guyana was the environmental specialist who was selected by the GWP-C to undertake this important work, and she's here today to lead us in our discussions and to ensure that the policy and roadmap reflect the priorities of stakeholders. Thank you, Dr. Bino. Consultation is key to this process. Such a policy cannot be developed without consultation with key stakeholders in Guyana, and this is why we are here today. The virtue of IWRM is that it is a participatory approach that requires the active involvement of key stakeholders at all levels, from government to community to private sector. Today's consultation is therefore critical as it provides an opportunity for dialogue and for you to review and provide inputs to finalize the policy and the plan, and it's an integral part of the IWRM process. However, I must offer a word of caution. Today's consultation is but one step in the process. Integrated water resources management is not static. It is not a one-off process. It is an evolving and continuous one, which calls for consistent and continuous engagement, review, and adaptation. Thus, your input does not end here. You will be asked to contribute to other consultations and activities surrounding the policy and plan, including participation in its implementation when it is finally passed. We all have a stake in safeguarding the future of our water resources. I thank you for your presence here today and the commitment which it signifies. I wish you productive deliberation over the next 2 days. Thank you.
In my particular area of specialization, not that I am claiming to be a specialist in water resources management, but I think that my experience in working in the field of environment for at least 18 years would have helped me to understand and appreciate the complexity of issues when we're dealing with water. And I want to say very early that a lot of times when we look at issues in a particular sector, we keep focusing on the sector to find the solutions. But many of the problems that might threaten the positive development of a sector can actually be outside of the sector. So I'm saying that even as we look at water, the threats to water resources can be identified outside of the water sector. Hence the importance of integration. Water is your business, it is my business, and it is everybody's business, because it is life. So in the remaining maybe half hour or less that I have, I want to just talk about, well, give you an introduction to the work that I've done. And I like the English language is great, because once you see the word draft, you know that it is not a document that is cast in stone. And the reason why it is draft is because it gives stakeholders, people who have a stake, people who have an interest, an opportunity to make changes. So I don't want you to perceive that this is something that we're saying that has to be done and it's lock, stock, and barrel. No, it's in the draft form, and the reason why we're having the stakeholder workshop is so that every person here can make a contribution, so at the end of the day, we can have something that we all agree to, and we can have buy-in by the wider society. So I'm going to give an introduction. I want to talk about the situational analysis, because it is very, very important. You did not get this document, but a 66-page situational analysis was done, because you need to know what is the situation regarding a particular resource. And in this context, we are talking about the water resource of Guyana. So a situational analysis was done. And then I want to outline some specific items or elements of the policy the vision statement, which I came up with, and I'm hoping that you're going to refine that statement. The overall goals, objectives. I'm just going to give a sample of the strategic areas because there are many, many strategic areas that have been identified. Elements of the roadmap. After lunch, you're going to have copies of the roadmap because the roadmap is a separate document, but it flows from the policy, okay? And then just to identify some imperatives for success. So, when I was given the terms of reference, I realized that this is a very tall order. So some of my responsibilities to undertake the situation analysis that I referred to earlier, to review and assess existing policies, legislation, institutional arrangement. That's very important because whenever we're talking about the management of a natural resource, the enabling environment is critical. If you don't have the policy, if you don't have the legislation, if you don't have the institutions with the capacity to enforce and to implement, then we have a problem. So understanding the enabling environment is critical in terms of the way forward. Identify and map stakeholders with an interest and role in IWRM. Provide guidance and leadership in participating consultative processes, including this workshop. Identify specific actions and interventions. Provide a timeline and set of milestones, which of course I'm hoping you will be able to help me with when you're working on the roadmap. Identify costs. Again, in the roadmap I have not put any costs because I don't think a consultant can sit down and decide this would be the cost. This has to be something that has to be worked out by stakeholders. And then to identify the process for developing the policy and roadmap, to document and to identify lessons learned and good practices. It's always important to document processes. So this IWRM policy, the draft policy statement for Guyana, it sets out a national vision. You have to have a vision before you're motivated to act. So the vision is important, and we need to agree on the vision before the end of this workshop. It's a product of the consultative process, and it's very flexible. And Ms. Alexander pointed that out because it's not a product, it's not an event, sorry. It is a process so that we will have more than one stakeholder consultation so that we can really ensure that everyone is happy with what is being put on paper. So that's the policy. Now, what is this roadmap that we're talking about? It attempts to answer three questions. Where do we want to go? If you don't know where you want to go, you go anyway, right? We know that. Similarly, when we're talking about natural resources management, where do we want to go? But in order to know where we want to go and to create that path, we have to have the situational analysis. Where are we now? What's the present situation like? And then we probably will see a gap between where we are now and where we want to go. And that is where we say, how do we get from here, where we are, to there, in the context of our vision? So the roadmap is actually the result of the situational analysis of the water resources plus the policy. Now I just want to share with you some issues from the situational analysis based on interviews that were conducted with stakeholders. more than 20 stakeholders, Conservation International, IWRM, University of Guyana, all the ministries, IDB, so Water Users Association, you name the stakeholder and the Environmental Protection Agency. At that time, we didn't have the Ministry of Environment, Natural Resources and Environment, but we did consult with a number of stakeholders, and in fact, in the situational analysis, I have even mentioned the names of the persons to whom I spoke. So this was not Politburo sitting down and deciding what are the threats. This came out of robust analysis based on what was said by the stakeholders. So what are some of the threats to our water resources? Climate change and climate variability. It is associated floods and droughts. Climate change is a big one because we know with climate change you're going to have variation, seasonal variation, water resources, you're going to have a drier climate, rainfall, in the context of agriculture, rainfall is king. So it creates a concern, okay? And the models from the University of the West Indies Mona campus, they're showing that we will really have a drier Caribbean. And that is something for us to think about. We therefore have to manage the resources. So a threat would be climate change and climate variability related to El Nino and the Nino phenomenon. Rapid development of housing schemes in urban areas. Not only urban areas, in rural areas as well. Because we know that once you begin to change the natural setting, you can affect infiltration rates, runoff rates, and all of that. And so in an urban setting, or even in a setting where you're changing the surface, that has implications for your water resources. Inappropriate land use practices. I don't need to make that any simpler, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. Low level of public awareness and flawed perception that water is plentiful and can be wasted. Guyana is land of many waters. So who said that we have a problem with water? Well, the accessibility of water that can be used can very well be a problem. So we cannot have this flawed perception that we have so many rivers and whatever else, and therefore there is no problem in water. You and I know in the 2010, 2009, 2010 drought period, what happened? So we need to take cognizance of this. Pollution from mining and fecal waste, another threat. Limited institutional capacity. And this has to do with technical resources and even inadequate legislation. In cases where you have legislation, the problem is enforcement. If we have legislation and you cannot enforce the legislation, we're back to square one. We have legislation so that legislation can be enforced. And this is something we really need to push in Guyana, to enforce the legislation and for people to respect the legislation. Limited management of freshwater aquifers and cross-boundary water resources. Okay? If I were to ask the question, how much groundwater do we have now? Do we know? Has there been any study on our groundwater resources? Well, then how do you manage? If you want to manage, which is a science as much as an art, you have to know how much of a particular resource you have. And from a sustainability standpoint, you then can manage, you can allocate. But in order to do that, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we need to be able to have the baseline data. We need to have the information that would say how much of this particular resource we have. conversion of wetlands and overuse of freshwater resources, lack of a system to capture and store fresh water. In many islands now, this is the system to capture fresh water, to capture and store fresh water, rainfall harvesting, and so it's really big, and it's being pushed by the Caribbean Environmental Health Institute. Livelihood and industrial activities threaten our water resources, particularly when you look at our watershed areas. So it's linked with this watershed degradation and depletion of aquifers. Poor waste management practices by households. Poor waste management practices by industries. Inadequate policy and regulatory framework for proper management. So these were all identified by the stakeholders. I also want to share with you some of the points that were made in respect of the effectiveness of the current policy framework for water resources management in Guyana. There were a few positive points, that we have good legislation, though of course, as I mentioned before, enforcement is lacking, and that can be as a result of a number of issues related to institutional capacity. The fact that we have an East Demerara Water Conservancy Act, and it's 1935, I think it is, and it's very crucial when we look at that act, okay? And I think this can be downloaded. I think it's available on Google, on the internet. And then there was also, through the help of the Caribbean Environmental Health Institute, a water safety plan for Linden was prepared, and stakeholders felt that that was a very effective one, so it's something that GWI might want to look at. But then there were many negative points that were made by the stakeholders. Again, this is not Dr. Magno sitting and writing these things. It came out of the analysis of the stakeholders. Hydromet is the main custodian of water resources. However, people are drilling boreholes without permission. The Water and Sewage, the Sewage Act is not fully enforced. The fact that the Water Council, how many of you are aware that there is a National Water Council in Guyana? Good. But stakeholders felt that the Water Council is not meeting. Remember, this study was done last year. So if they're meeting it this year, don't tell me that this is not true, because this reflects 2011. The council is not meeting, but the council is crucial. In fact, when you look at the Water and Sewage Act, you realize that the council has the power also to set the policy and trend. So the council can work hand in hand in this process, okay? But the problem was the meeting of the council. Climate change needs to be incorporated in legislation. When our environmental legislation was formulated, climate change was not a big issue. But now it's very topical, and maybe we need to look at our legislation again. Legislations are not effective since they are all compartmentalized. We have to consolidate legislation. We have to see areas of synergy. We have to ensure that legislation does not conflict with each other. Organizations to implement policies and legislations are too fragmented. If you did a quick search or a quick count of all the institutions with some degree of responsibility for water management in this country, you will get more than 10. I can assure you. With some responsibility. Remember, I'm not saying overall, but some degree of responsibility. Okay? But you have a very fragmented approach. Hence the importance of the Water Council. A very, very important institutional arrangement. At that point, in 2011, there was no set policy on watershed management. How many people in Georgetown know exactly the source of fresh water? Can they point to the watershed areas? Do they know about watersheds? When forest is destroyed indiscriminately, do people realize that they're putting at risk water resources? So watershed management is critical to the protection and management of water resources. So any policy that is going to address water resource management in this country must also address the issue of watershed management, and hence the importance of working together in an integrated way. Because if you're going to talk about watershed management, land use planning becomes critical. Forestry protection, very, very critical. Environmental protection. So from that alone, you can identify some of the key institutions. No established standards. We know that we use the PAHO WHO standards. We don't have our own standards, but this is something I think that we have managed to deal with using acceptable standards otherwise. So we now come to the policy statement itself. What does it set out to do? Well, it has to set goals and objectives to the management of water resources. I'm not going to read all the lines. It addresses both quantity and quality aspects. But if we have no baseline data on quantity, it is difficult. And so even in terms of getting this policy or implementation of this policy, we need to see a priority activity as establishing the baseline for our water resources in this country. We have to be able to do that. It would also include matters of jurisdiction and delegation and items like the extent to which water management is decentralized. Decentralization is the new paradigm in resource management. We have to decentralize functions, and so this is something that we have to think about. So having said that, I then tried to come up with a vision statement because, well, as the word says, without a vision we perish, and I just want to use that to apply it also to resource management, right? Without a vision, the resources are open to lots of threats. So what is this vision statement that I'm talking about? Of course, a vision statement is very ambitious, as you know. It is always there for you to reach. Okay, so don't look at it and dismiss it and say, this doesn't sound possible. That is why it's a vision statement. Because it actually gives us an opportunity to use all of our resources to get there. Integrated planning, and the word integrated is important. Resource management in this region, not only Guyana, but resource management on a whole, is too fragmented. And the way things operate in the real world, everything is connected to everything else. It's a basic rule. It's a law. Everything is connected to everything else. So you cannot divorce the issues. So water issues are related to other issues in a society. So we're talking about integrated planning and management of water resources. That's the first thing in the vision. But why? To safeguard health, safety, and welfare. Health, safety, and welfare of Guyana's citizens. So this is a very anthropocentric approach. It's very human-centered. So what did I do? I added ecosystems. Because we don't only protect a resource because of human needs. That will be very selfish. But also, for natural ecological systems, the resource should be protected. So this word ecosystem is very important because water is key to forests and so on. You know that, biodiversity. And to ensure effective, efficient, You know what's efficiency in resource management? Doing more or getting more with less, or doing more with less. That is what is efficiency in resource management. So if you can do more with less, you don't waste water. You don't waste water. And this is something to think about. But also, we want to look at the equitable use of water resources. Consistent. It has to be consistent with something. Our sustainable development goals of the nation. So this is where we have to relate it to our environmental policy, our low carbon development strategy, our national development strategy, and so on. Poverty reduction and all of that. Our sustainable development goals, because we know that sustainability is multifaceted. Economic sustainability, ecological sustainability, and social sustainability. What's the overall goal? And remember, this is just draft, so you can change it. To improve governance structures. A lot of times, the problems that are manifested in the real world as they relate to resource management are, as a result, the root cause lies in the governance structures. I'm not saying this based on textbook. I'm saying this based on what I know. What I have seen manifested for the 18 years I've been working as a specialist in this area of environmental management. So, governance structures and processes. To improve that, how? By promoting IWRM. We have to promote it and to use in an effective, efficient, and environmentally sustainable manner that will safeguard the nation's human. Again, this got to be us. And then you see I drop in this word, natural capital. So that's where the environment, natural resources, and so on become. So, what are the objectives of the policy? And again, I won't read all the lines, but just to highlight a few. And I try to make these objectives relevant to the Water and Sewage Act that we have of 2002. And you can read that. It's very important that you know this act. So the first objective has to do with sustaining water. When you sustain a resource, it means that you're using now and that you have access to it for future, that future generations have access to that resource. That is what sustainability is about. Meeting the needs of the present without compromising future generations from meeting their needs. So we're talking about intergenerational equity as far as resources are concerned. Okay? Now, so we want to ensure that they're managed in the face of climate variability and global climate change. And this is where our climate change policy and our climate change action plan must speak directly to water resource management. Likewise, the policy must relate to the climate change action plan and the climate change policy that we have. To conserve, protect, and improve the quality. We can improve the quality, especially if we minimize the indiscriminate practices that threaten water resources, not only on the coast, but also in the hinterland of our country. We want to reform public behavior because we want to create stewards. We want stewards of our water resources through improved public education. And I am not talking here about information because, ladies and gentlemen, the provision of information, it is not similar to the sort of education that is going to make a change, to bring about an attitudinal change. We have to transcend basic information. People must have attitudinal changes as well, so that the messages must be created in a way that would cause people to think about their own actions and to get them to become responsible citizens. So, reforming public behavior is important. Why is it? Many persons in the household believe that the waterways, the water bodies, the aquatic systems are the answer to the waste disposal problems. So you have an old car and you think you can just go dump it in the ocean. Huh? You have a lot of garbage in your yard, you think you can go dump it in the trench nearby. Why is it people think that way? It is not the answer, because after all, the trench nearby or the ocean is also part of the environment. And remember what I said, everything is connected to everything else. So this problem about away, what is away? In environmental management, we don't talk about away. And because we think about away, you throw away. What is away? How can you throw away something? Away is still in the environment. So, you understand what I'm saying? The way you perceive the word away, it is not in my backyard, maybe, but it is in somebody else's backyard. And so in order to bring about, to effect a change in public behavior, we have to send the right messages. To ensure training and capacity buildings for different groups. And we want the policymakers to be trained. So sustaining water and then valuing water. You know, when you value a resource, it is so different in the way you're going to use the resource. Because consumerism, the way we consume natural resources, be it water, soil, or whatever, that has implications for environment and environmental management. So we want to ensure equitable allocation. We need to start looking at allocating water in a very scientific way. But how can we do that if we don't know baseline, if we don't have the baseline data? So we need to get our water engineers to start, and our economists to start looking at this allocation of water. And to recognize and assure existing rights of water users. We all have a right. But this valuing water is important because sometimes, because of the fact that we consider water as a social, well, it's a right, it's a human right issue. To have access to water is a human right. But also, water should be considered like a product as well, because there is a cost incurred by providing the water. And sometimes people would say, okay, when we talk about poverty, you know, if you put a cost, a value to the water, which, you know, because in natural resource management, we can use the soft approach, which is the education and all of that, and then we can come with the big stick approach, and we can say legislation, and then we can also say use an economic instrument, because when the pocket feels it, you are forced to conserve. If you have to pay for water, if some of us had to pay for water at the price that it really costs the institution to provide water, then when we are brushing our teeth, we won't have the pipes running. And we're guilty of that. So we can start with basic things. You're having a shower, you can't sing, but you're still singing away, and the water is running. We do certain things that really we question our own behavior patterns and how they impact. I'm just trying to be as very simple as possible, because it starts, environmental protection, natural resource management starts with you. You draw a circle around yourself. It starts with you. Because a lot of times when we see problems manifested in the environment in this country, we like to point fingers at the institutions. Who creates environmental problems? Humans. Not institutions, humans. And so when humans change their behavior, then we can have a change in the resources. So this is important. Then we want to talk about integrating, so sustaining, valuing, integrating and collaborating for water. And P.S. McGarrell already talked about this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But we have to have integrated management. When it comes to water, we have to stop this turfism. You know what turfism? This is my turf, don't interfere with it. Well, if this is your turf, and the threats to water are outside of that particular sector, and you don't want to integrate with other sectors, then we will always have a problem with water resources. So we have to cut out turfism. It's myopic thinking. And to understand that we have to collaborate if we're going to talk about rational use. To create opportunities for all water users to have equal right. If you have a drought, why is it some proper, everyone should have equal access to the water? And that can only come if we do allocation. And to protect communities in the hinterland. The El Nino effect during the dry period, the drought period, we know. Okay? And then, sometimes this is like a very strange word to us. Right? EPA officer, we know that. It's a very strange word in natural resource management in the context of the region. I'm not saying Guyana, in the region. Monitoring. We don't like to monitor. And the reason why we don't monitor is because we don't have any baseline. You can only monitor if you have baseline. Because the change is based on what you have now, what you had then, and what you have now at the time of taking the measurement. And so we have to be able to monitor. Monitor and assess. And monitor talks about it's periodic. It's not one time 10 years ago and you still have that data that you want to make policies on. It has to be ongoing. So monitor to inform the process of management, allocation, and sustainable use. So having set the vision, the objectives, the goal and the objectives, which are subject to changes based on the experts that we have here, okay, because I know some of you would be able to make some very good changes. I then thought it's important to have the strategic areas of action. And for the strategic areas of action, I will just outline them. River basin management. We have to be able to manage our basin, like the Demerara watershed area, okay? And so we have to be able to manage water rights and allocation, water supply and sanitation, very important. Health, water and health. So this is an important aspect. Water for the environment, this is from an ecosystems point of view, because water is an ecosystem service. Public and private involvement, very important for water. Public-private partnership, very, very important. Water and agriculture, water and hydropower, which again can fall under energy, emergency and extreme measures, flood control, wastewater control, economic and financial management, a very critical aspect. Research and information management. We have to be able to make research a priority in this country when it comes to the management of any natural resource. Because it's only when we do the research we understand what is the status of that particular resource. For us to sit down and to determine what is threatened, what is not threatened, and those sorts of things, it's not done in a very scientific way. But when we do the research, we can then manage the information to help to inform the process of policy making. Capacity building. We have to train and we have to retrain. And the reason why we have to retrain sometimes, because people who would have got their degrees maybe, and this is not a hit to anybody who might be over 50 or 60 or whatever. But you know, if you're trained in a single discipline, you got your first degree in 1970 or something like that, where interdisciplinarity was not the focus of the day. But now, in talking about environmental management and natural resources management, you have to be able to think in an interdisciplinary way. Connectivity now. And so, we have to train and retrain. We have to build the capacity, technical capacity. Behavioral change, I talked about that before. Monitoring and evaluation, institutional policy, the legislative framework, and of course, international cooperation, because we share water with other countries, neighboring countries, and we know that. So the international cooperation is important. What I try to do here is just to highlight a few, but I will just skip a few because of time. So, for example, under water rights and allocation, we need to review the allocation of customary rights so that we can decide who gets water, for what purpose, how much, at what time, and all of that. This is done in a number of other countries around the world. Promote efficient use of water resources that would harmonize great economic and social benefits. Periodic review of water allocation in view of the socio-economic development plans. So as you plan, you review, you plan, and it's a cycle. Water supply and sanitation, these are some of the points that were made, and I've taken these out of the roadmap. So you won't have it in, I don't think you would have it in your document. I've taken, it is in the document. No, it's in the roadmap, so you will get this document this afternoon, where I've outlined these are the outcomes on each of the strategic areas, okay? So, water supply and sanitation, improve access and availability of safe and affordable drinking water supplies. Promoting rainwater harvesting. I know many rural communities do that, even in the urban community, but this is something we can promote a little bit more. Protection of watersheds. Management of underground aquifers. Water for environment. We're talking about the maintenance of the integrity of aquatic systems, the water bodies, preserving the quantity at levels compatible with demand. So this is why we need to know what is our demand. We will only know that if we do some work in the field. Management of surface runoff. This again, the vegetation, very, very important. The way we change the hydrology of an area. Okay, through development action. Development has a cost, and this is why we need to do environmental impact assessment. It's a critical tool for decision making, especially when we're talking about management of that particular resource. Restoration of watershed areas through reforestation and green infrastructure. When we talk about tourism, we have to push green infrastructure. Conserving and protecting critical habitats. And then public and private involvement, we talk about roles and responsibilities, coordination of policies, the private sector, fostering public and private partnerships to improve the quality, and this is important. Banks DIH has been doing a lot of work, okay? And other companies, DDL and so on, and this is what we need. Corporate social responsibility. Very, very good, okay? Then water for hydroelectricity. We need to facilitate this, and we know through the low carbon development strategy that this is being done, but importantly, we need sustainability appraisals. We know that. Behavioral change. Under the outcomes, the activities, talk about launching of a national education campaign. Introduce a tariff system that will be simple to enforce and be understood and supported. This is a ticklish one. This is tariff and GWI will know that. But it's something that we can't run away from. We have to look at it. Because as I said, in every other part of the world, in dealing with natural resource management, especially water, sometimes the economic instrument really promotes conservation at a greater rate than just the soft, the education and the lovely advertisements and whatever else. And the public messages, all of that, very good. But when the pocket feels it, right? And we can't, you see, behavior, you can't, you see this sort of flawed perception we have, that it's only when you're rich you waste a resource. It's not true. We can be poor and still waste a resource. So poverty in itself doesn't drive conservation at all times. Okay? It does not drive conservation at all times. And so it is important that when we look at the socioeconomic profiles of households, that we then determine what the tariffs will be. And you can't look at somebody's house, which is the most unscientific thing I can think about. How can you look at a house and say, okay, this one has 5 rooms, so you've got to be using more water. And this one has 1 room. Now, even at the secondary school entrance exam, if a student said that, I will just mark it wrong. You can't. Because behavior of a resource is not a function of the number of rooms in a home. Because you don't know, you have to have other data, the lifestyles, what they have, what they use, how they use it, and all of that. Okay? So, the tariff system, and then, of course, when we educate children, the multiplying effect is great, because children have a way of going home and telling their parents what they've learned, and they can actually help to inculcate in adults the correct value and attitude. Monitoring evaluation for water resources. I wish if this could be a priority, to establish a national monitoring and evaluation body, even if it's a sub-body within the National Council, or whether it's the GWI board. But we need this. Monitoring and evaluation. Support strengthening of the institutions to carry out this. And of course, we want a decentralized system. The Water Users Association is very, very critical, because they can be foot soldiers. Mechanisms at the community level, we have to involve people. People must feel connected to a resource in such a way that they become the watchdogs. When they see somebody in the community wasting water, say you're washing your vehicle, and because maybe you don't have a meter, you wash again, you wash again. What is that? So this is a behavior that is not good in the context of managing water resources. So that if you have a community that is so sensitized, somebody within the community can say, but you know, you really shouldn't be doing this, in a nice way. So this is important for us. And of course, provision of timely and reliable data and information for tracking sector progress. The legislative framework is important. Review periodically the existing laws, and this is number 16 in the strategic area, that's why you have this number in here. Implement recommended reforms. A lot of times, lots of studies have been done on different aspects of environment in this country, but implementation is weak. Okay? So, my last 2 or 3 slides, just to tell you what the roadmap is about, because I said where we want to go, where we are, and how we're going to get there. Remember? So, the roadmap that I've prepared, the draft roadmap, let me correct myself, it seeks to strengthen stakeholder coordination, provide a clear and agreed sense of direction, establish synergies between the relations between synergies in respect of relations between various development initiatives, and assure that gaps and overlaps are minimized or avoided. And in the roadmap that you're going to get this afternoon, these are the areas that have been identified. The roadmap will first of all have the outcomes, which would be the specific activities that I have already outlined for a few strategic areas. Okay? What are the outcomes or the objective? And then the activities, which would be linked to the outcomes. And then I've also identified the performance indicators. How will we know when we would have achieved the outcome? What can we look for? What can we measure? So those will be the performance indicators. Schedule, whether it's long-term, short-term, medium-term. The cost is something that I would like you to work on. And the responsibility. Everybody's business becomes nobody's business. And in natural resource management, we have to be able to assign responsibilities for each activity. You have a lead agency or a lead institution, and then you have partners. And so in the roadmap for Guyana's water resource, integrated water resource management, we want to be able to identify responsibilities and to ensure that the agencies or the institutions have the capacities. And lastly, having done all of that, what would be the imperatives for successful implementation? Imperative, something you can't do without. You got to value the water. We got to value the water. I want every household in Guyana to begin to say it and to live it. Value water. A lot of experts at universities, including University of Cambridge, are saying that in 50 years' time, the problem will not so much be climate change, but it will be water. And you might have water wars, because water is going to be threatened by climate change. So, valuing water, sustaining what we have, monitoring the water, innovation through science, technology, and finance, integrating and collaborating the legislative reform, administrative reform, and continued political support. Very, very important. Okay? So those are the imperatives that I have listed, and I'm sure you might be able to think of more. But, as I said, this is in draft. The word draft means that it can be changed. So unless we we understand the meaning of the word draft, we will come here with a flawed perception that this is something cast in stone and we want people to rubber stamp it. That is not the point. We have a working document because it is better to start with something than to start with nothing. We waste too much time when we have nothing. You start with something and you can change it in any way you want. But at the end of the day, we want everybody here, all the stakeholders, to agree so that we can move forward and protect our country's water resources, because water is life. I thank you so much.